Jake, thanks for coming on.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
I always start these things with a bit deep question. Who is Jake Bernardus?
I guess I'm whoever you want to be. But reality, so I am currently the CISO Anecdotes. I'm also a podcaster myself, kind of a social influencer of some form, apparently, accidentally. And then got into investing recently as well, some advisory work. So all the things that I suppose the modern CISO vendor will probably is. Historically, I've been around the space as a CISO for a number of years, multiple times, 3 or 4 times at this point. I was a consultant and a pen tester prior to that. So kind of normal security background, I guess, to a degree, whatever normal looks like. But yeah, and for now, I live in the UK, work for an Israeli company and spend a lot of time in the US. So I'm a person that spends a lot of time on planes and airport lounges, begrudgingly many times.
Fair enough. Okay. I didn't realize you were doing bits of investing now. What are you keeping an eye out for when you're looking for potential investment opportunities?
So I think for me, there's a couple of things. So I have 2 different modes. I invest in some VCs, and they're usually like ones we can have individual contributor VCs. So if you look at like the likes of like Lockstep VC or you and I, which are 2 that money, as well as Squared Circle, which was started by Carl Matz, who's a good friend of mine. They're kind of like, I suppose, a combination to allow kind of CISOs into the loop. We spent so much time in the VC world. But like, we're not institutional investors, right? Most of us don't have millions to drop. We've got hundreds of thousands of investors to drop. So they give you access to be able to be part of a network of opportunity you wouldn't be historically. But the other side of that is as an angel investor, I put kind of small seed checks into companies. And there I'm looking, I guess, at 2 things. One is, who's the founder? Like, what is motivating them? How do they think? What's their problem? Do they understand the problem? They have a solution that works? Like, why are they building the company? The second is, do I think that the product is interesting? And for me, the mantra has always been, will I buy it? So right now I've invested purely in cyber as an individual. And for me, that's based on things that I think there is legs in because I would buy them. I think that when you get into the investing game, like if you're going for a VC or a portfolio, then that's one thing. You want to know what it's kind of focused on, where it distributes money, what its priorities are, what its examples of expected return are, like how it thinks. But when you're individual, you should really say out things that you understand. Same as like if you're in the stock market. Don't get out an index fund unless you understand the company you're invested in. And I think it's the same when it's like, it's my kid's future. It's my generational cash. So, yeah, I pick companies and people who I understand and who I think have an idea that will resonate because I would both understand it and also actually buy it.
Wonderful mantra. Okay, nice. How can AI improve GRC?
So I think like the AI question generally is becoming a little bit aged, very quickly. They're like, now AI everything. I think the question is less like, let's take AI out of the issue and look at like a domain or specific area of security and say, what are the current fundamental issues that need fixing? And how can we automate those? And then let's talk about whether AI is part of that. So I think if you look in GRC, it's been through several waves historically. It started as being pretty archaic. It was based in spreadsheets and documents. We got slightly past that in like kind of 2015, 2016, we started to see some players out there who put like a web UI in there. It was effectively like a spreadsheet, but in a GUI. So at that point, you could kind of centralize that stuff. You could do some cross mapping. You can have some reminders. You got some notifications. You could upload it to a platform that to rely on a person's laptop who, if they left you, was screwed. Then we saw the starts of like companies like ours, like Anecdotes, Pedradas, the Vantas, the multiple kind of new vendors in the GRC space who were, well, actually, all this data doesn't require collection. We can create APIs and connect to applications in the stack. We can pull the data in, map it to the controls it's supposed to rely to or correspond to, and then we can flush that to an audit and get rid of this whole process of people collecting screenshots of evidence. So I think that's where we got to. And then if we look at like where we are now, we start to say, what can we do next? Like if we now have this data, like forget like I can just, here's the control, here's the evidence, here's the auditor. Like what workflows can I build? Like how can I look at things that we're still doing and trying to do in a smarter way? So maybe look at like a risk assessment. Historically, still like a risk is like a finger in the air job, right? Everyone's risk register is, I take a number of risks. I think they are risks because of A, B, and C. I think the exposure and the likelihood is D and E, and therefore the value of that risk is F. But that's all guesswork. It's all subjective. And then when you put a control in place, a mitigating or a control to reduce that risk, it's still guesswork, right? And the reality is you never really know if that control is effective. And if that control is effective, why is it still a risk in the risk register? So then you start looking at that as a concept where AI can be applied. Let's say I run a query inside of like the AI functions of Anecdotes app product. And I say, right, I want to look at my risk register. I want you to analyze the efficacy of all of the controls that are put in place and mitigate controls against risks. I want you to see how effective they currently are. If they are effective, I want you to make an estimate calculation on how effective they are at reducing the risk and therefore give me a valuation based on that. If they're not effective, I want you to remove that control as a mitigating control, flag it as no longer having an effective control, and create a Jira ticket which you go to do something. If there's no controls in place, I want you to do the same thing. Right? And I want you to take that data, I want you to run a report every week, send me a Slack message with the report. I want you to create a dashboard that I can then use to create and submit to executive leadership team or to a board. And you look at that, and that's a set of series of actions, all of which independently are not that complex. But as a workflow, they're fairly mature. And now you've got two options. You either rely on AI historically or in its current form, which means that if I run that one week and I run it the next time, the chances are the results are actually physically different, because that's the nature of how AI currently works. Or you can do what we do, is effectively take that first query, seeing that you've got the result that you want, and then effectively codifying that to a micro app. So rather than running an AI query the next time, you're just rerunning the same application effectively. So that's when you get to like, what can AI do in GRC? It can take what was already a stepped process that's gone from manual to semi-manual and start to say, actually, well, now let's do things that we are already doing, but let's automate and repeat them in a way that's more intelligent. And if you've got the benefit of having the data, like if you look at how APIs function, if you're pulling data in from platforms that are like Endpoint, that are like MDM, that are CSPM, to CNAPs, all this like volumes of data, well, now you've got access to be able to query that data and do stuff with it. So you start to actually, let's look at CSPM data, for example, or Wiz or an Orca. Right now, there's alerting on those platforms that says if something's misconfigured or if this happens, then do this, right? And you can build that. But I could build something more sophisticated and say, well, actually, I want to run a report from that. I want to cross-reference it to the data from my MDM. So I want to look at that and say, is there any correlation between a user's cloud activity and where their device geographically resides? And if that's true, so if let's say when devices are in, pick a country, in the UAE, then is it more likely that they will create insecure cloud instances which are flagging as non-configured or misconfigurations? And if that's true, then create an alert, create a ticket, or auto-remediate by blocking the creation of that. Right, so then you start to build these workflows where you're not just pulling data out, but you're feeding activity back to it. So when you look at, and I think that's not native or specific to GRC. When I look at AI, like we are obsessed with like Google. Like it's a chat line feature. We're asking GPT questions and we're getting answers out of it. And everyone's AI functions in security job right now is the same thing. There's a data set that's already there. Go on the command line, ask a question, interrogate the data. But where it becomes meaningful, interesting is when we're actually doing things. Like when I'm building recipes, workflows, automations that are repeatable, that actually act. They don't just tell me things, they actually change things. And that's when it really starts to shift the needle.
Wow. Okay. I'm gonna buy it. So that makes absolute sense. And it's something no-brainer for every business to have that because of how can you make very intelligent decisions as a business if you have access to this sort of platform? There's businesses out there that don't use it. Why?
I think there's two answers to that question. One is an inherent fear. So there is still a resistance to AI adoption or to technology adoption, full stop, in this kind of world, right? If you look at certain things that were more manual and you talk at like, let's take it out of just GRC. Let's look at like places like finance, like HR, like recruitment, industries that have traditionally been process and human driven. There is a great chance to leverage technology in all of those spaces. But the reality is that the natural consumer for it, people like your company, are going to panic and go out and say, that's my job. Like, right. And so there is a natural fear. The same with GRC. There are GRC practitioners who are thinking, well, if we can automate that stuff, that's what I get paid for. And it's a narrow mindset, because when you really look at it and you think, well, actually, like if you look at vulnerability management or risk registers inside of a business, or you look at third-party risk reviews, or you look at actual code reviews happening in development cycles, all of this stuff is very much like kind of checkbox right now. It's like do the bare minimum because no one has time to focus on it because there's so many tasks to do. But if you really got someone who understood the concept, what I'm saying is all the crap that you don't like doing, the mundane, boring tasks that yes, do fill your job, you don't need to do. That doesn't mean that you're unemployed. That means that you're going to spend your time focusing on things that are more meaningful to the business, that drive actual outcomes that affect the business, that you can actually do work that interests you and builds and develops your career. So that we talk about security in this department of no or this cost center. That should be stuff that we should be able to change right now. So I think that's problem one is people don't, there's a FUD or a fear around AI adoption that it will take my job. It won't take your job. It'll allow you to do something different, right? And that different thing is probably better for you and it's probably better for the business. The second piece, I think, once you get past that is just the actual internal technical, like maturity level and the process maturity level. If you're going to automate something, you have to be able to automate something that exists. So like you can't, let's say I tell you, you're going to go home and you're going to cook a recipe, right? You're going to make, I don't know, some gnocchi dish. Like I can automate the creation of that in theory. I need some robotics. I need to program and tell it what to do, in what order and how to do it. And in theory, I don't need you to make that dish. However, I do need the recipe. So if you don't know how to make it, I can't automate it. And if all I'm relying on is you give me the answer, then I'm pretty screwed, right? So I have to go and find the book. And that's the problem. When you say you can automate GRC processes, if your business is very ad hoc or doesn't really know what good looks like, A to Z, then I can't automate it because you don't know what you need automated. And then you go beyond that one layer and you will actually, I also need data. Like I talked about risk registers. I need to understand the data that underpins whether that risk is a risk and why it's a risk. I need to understand the calculation that got you to your valuation of that risk. I need to understand the control that's mitigating or reducing that risk and the data that supports its efficacy. If you can't get me access to that data, well, AI is shit in, shit out. Like, so if it's got no real quality going into it, it can't have a quality output. And if it doesn't know what your current good looks like, it can't automate it. So problem one is like people fear AI. Problem two is they want to adopt it, but they just don't actually have the foundations to leverage to make it effective. If you look at most of the AI failing right now, it's not because the technology is failing. It's because the things it's trying to automate don't work anyway. So like you can't automate something which doesn't work. It's like trying to build a house really fast, but not knowing how to build a house to begin with.
I mean, you touched on there about the validity of what it's spitting out. Is that a massive concern? I know you said it's shit on, shit out. But do people actually trust what it is spitting out? Because it's so high stakes, a lot of this stuff.
I think the problem is not trust. The problem is verifiability. So like, if you look at, so you go back to like the beginnings of ChatGPT a couple of years ago. Like one of the fundamental problems was people were inherently very trusting of it. Like if you look at it as a society where we've got, so like you go back, I'm 40 years old this year. If you go back to like reading newspapers when I was a kid, I grew up before there was mobile phones. The internet was fledgling in my early years. Like I remember the first PCs coming to people's houses. Like this stuff all happened when I was a kid. Now my parents read a newspaper and that's how they consumed their news. Now I don't know, to this day I'm not quite sure how my mom read a Times newspaper every week because the thing looks like a short novel. But that's actually consumed the news. Now we went one stage further and we digitalized that, right? We created news articles and the newspapers became digital first time. The exact same content, the same volume of content, but in a digital concept. You could read it on your iPad, or pre-iPad, if you're on the computer. We then took that and we had the starts of the iPad, of the iPhone and stuff, and we took smaller versions of stories, like, like a BBC News, or you get a Times app. They would take the same stories, but condense them into smaller consumable format. And over time, that became, well, actually, let's just shrink that again. And then let's shrink that again. And then let's get to like a single paragraph. And then let's get to a headline. And then let's get to a short video explaining it. And then that short video on Instagram was too long. So we went to TikTok and we made it like 7 seconds. And now we're down to like one picture. Like you can consume the news in like, there's feeds on both TikTok and on Instagram and on X that will give you your news in 10 pictures a day. No words. Right? And that's the point of where we've got as a society. We are inherently incredibly trusting because we don't verify. So when AI first came, people were writing essays. And the reason they were getting picked up is because they were factually complete now. His ChatGPT wants to quote, do it later. Like, go back and say, I want to write this like paragraph, I want to write a speech, and I want to give you 3 quotes. I can guarantee you one of those 3 quotes is made. Now, if you challenge ChatGPT and say, where's that quote from? It'll go, oh, sorry, that's like, it's paraphrasing. And you'll be like, well, why did you paraphrase? Because you said you wanted a quote. Well, why did you give me a direct quote? You didn't tell me that. Why the hell did you think I didn't want a direct quote? Like, so you get to this problem, you're arguing with a computer. But coming back to my first point on GRC, that's the problem, is that because people don't know how to verify it, and because people are akin to naturally trusting data, they're scared. Because they think, if I get that data, I don't know how I'm going to fact check it. I don't know how I'm going to go out and prove if it's right or wrong. And I think when I present it, people will trust it immediately. And then if it gets proven to be wrong later, I look like an idiot. So I think that's the real core issue. It's around how we trust data sets and how capable we are of verifying or fact checking data. Most people, the fact you smile and laugh when I explain that story, most people don't know that. The whole concept of generative AI is it will generate. If it doesn't know an answer or doesn't have access to an answer, it will create one. But most people don't realize that they trust it. And that's the problem here. Is like people in our industry are naturally very cynical and don't trust. So you get this data set, can't verify it, can't prove it, I can't trust it, and therefore I can't consume it. And that's where the problem starts.
So what's the answer?
I think there is a lot of cultural things that need to happen. So I think that we need to start realizing that even if I can't trust it, how do I know I can trust the data you gave me? Why are you more trustable than I am? Like, or why are you more trustable than AI instances? Again, there's an argument debate we could have here, but the reality is it's very hard to factually prove the right or wrong in that statement. So I think we need to get to a point where we start to accept that being wrong in AI is no different to being wrong in person. And as soon as we accept that, we're okay. Then we say, and then in the next step, we have to go, well, let's try and find a way to verify data. So if that is vulnerability data, I can go back and find out the answers. If that's GRC stuff, I should be able to go and find the answers, because if AI has generated it, it's come from a data source somewhere, so the data source should be checkable. Let's find a way where we can actually get to a point where we can get to good enough. Right? Maybe I don't have time to fully verify it, but I'm going to verify it partially or get to a point where I'm comfortable with it. That's where we need to get to. But what we've got right now is a transitional period where there is a very disruptive industry. Cyber is very disruptive. A lot of it comes out of Tel Aviv, particularly Israel, or out of the West Coast, or out of New York as well these days. There is led by young founders who grew up in technology, who grew up in SaaS, who grew up in the early days of AI, before it was really called AI, it was sexy and fun. But you've got buyers, predominantly CISOs or CIOs or whatever domain we look into, who didn't, who were founding their careers in the 80s or the 90s. And these technologies put them at risk. They don't want to make the wrong decision and then prove to not understand what they think they understand. So I think we've got this disconnect between a new and disruptive technology and a buyer audience who's not ready to accept it. And until that kind of somehow coalesces in the middle, I think we're going to keep having this constant battle of like AI's corners is changing, but then on the other side of the audience saying, yeah, but it's not actually doing anything. It's just like hype and noise. I think it's going to take a while before that kind of settles down. I mean, we're 2 years into the AI journey at this point since ChatGPT really launched as human hands. I think things are still settling fast.
Do we still need humans within GRC?
100%. We still need humans everywhere, right? The reality is that the jobs are changing. I've had a lot of conversations recently with CISOs about like, what does the future of my industry look like?
Yeah.
Most of us grew up in like a SOC analysts or pen testers or software developers. And we went from that process and went up into becoming managers and then into directors and into CISOs. And we developed skill sets along the way, and kind of the reverse of like a sales funnel, we funneled up into leadership roles. Now, if that entry level position, that job one, that pen test, that SOC analyst, that GRC analyst, if that job goes because we automate it instead of AI, then you ask this question of like, how do people develop foundational skills? And if they don't develop foundational skills, do we have a future of actual leaders, or are leaders simply basing off of textbooks so they never actually get hands on? So that's the problem which I think you're kind of pointing at. But I think the reality is actually, it comes back to the idea, if you could do more with less, would you? Like if you look at like how much time a day you probably spend on your phone, that's because that phone allows you to do things or work in a way that if you spend 10 hours a day with your mobile, you're probably equating to 20 hours a day of work in the 90s in an office. Because you're able to be active, to respond, to do things in a faster way. You're not waiting for a phone call. You're responding to a Slack message. You're not waiting for physical posts. You're responding to emails, and that email chain is instant. You go to WhatsApp and share data. You can Zoom and share like live demos over a call. Like you could do things now that would have required you to be significantly more available or more at work historically. And that's the same with AI, right? We are looking for people to become orchestrators. Like if you look at what's coming up with Anthropic, with Paperclip, this concept that you can basically create a business by hiring 10 agents who will create and run your business for you with different assigned tasks and skill sets. That's where we're going. And the reality is that like, we need orchestrators, people who embrace that technology within its remits and parameters and can say, well, I can now do things I couldn't do before because I have a team who's effectively working for me. As long as they understand how those things work and the limitations put on them, they're suddenly able to focus their resources on accomplishing more things. And there's more code being written now than ever before. And people might argue and say, yeah, but the code's a load of crap because it's all being written by Cursor or by Claude. But the truth is there's more code going around there. And as long as we accept that there is probably inherent risk or limitations, and we might need an extra review stage, or we might need an agent to review the agent, we're getting to a place where we're getting more productive. And I think that's when you say, like, will there still be people? There will still be people, but they'll be different. There will be people who won't be doing entry-level roles. There'll be people who will become orchestrators. And there'll be people who, rather than learning hands-on keys, will be understanding how things go together. Like the future of what our industry needs is not practitioners per se. It's people who can see a problem, can see a solution, and understand what the solution looks like. I don't need you to code it. Vibe coding exists now. I just need you to know that if A to B is where you need to get to, what does that path look like? And then be able to basically put the building blocks together to make that happen. Like that's what we now need. We don't need people who are great developers. We don't need people who are great pen testers. We don't need people who are great SOC analysts. We need people who are seeing the problems as they exist and can think strategically about how to deliver solutions.
Wow. If you can start your career again, would you do the same thing? Or would you do something completely different now with what you know of what the world is like?
I'm not a person who thinks that you should go back. I think that it's very hard to make decisions without context. Sure. Of like having lived in history. But I think I've had a great career today and I enjoy and love what I do. I'm very lucky. But I think that if you look now, historically jobs, we talk about geography and risk, right? And we always joke, it says that everyone now should be a plumber and electrician. But the reality is like you're looking for things which are the hardest things to possibly automate in the future. It's a long time before I can put a robot under floorboards that can take apart and join pipes. Long time. It's a long time before I can put a robot together that can wire a house because of the limitations of how physically challenging that actually is in certain space and how it runs wires and stuff. It's not a long time before, if I don't exist, I'd do robotic surgery. So the super exclusive professions that required incredible academics, skill sets, and just discipline of time historically, like lawyers, surgeons, accountants, are some of the easiest things to replace. Like they are commonly well-defined process stereo argument, really logical common processes that I can understand and automate and rebuild. So I think that if I went back, would I change? I think I'd consider like a physical hands-on job. Like I think with what I do now, like I think I'd go back and be like a builder. Like build like a construction company. Because it's all made before that's going to be like AI will architect houses, but it won't physically build them. And I think that's probably safe. Like I think that as long, but at the same time, I don't believe in this like paradigm that we're all going to become unemployed and universal basic income can then like take over the world. Like I think that we will just, in the same way the industrial revolution changed and multiple revolutions historically on every side of the pond have done the same thing. We'll just, people who are adaptive and who are willing to move with the time will find new ways to deploy their skills in a different environment. So I don't fear for my kids' jobs or for my own career. Will I have to change where I focus my areas to some of the skills that I have? I developed skills as a pen tester. Are they relevant now? Probably less. It's all right. I used to build search engineering and deepfakes. It used to take me days, if not weeks. I can drop on the phone now in 30 seconds. So like that job right now, I'm like glad I don't do that 100%. But at the same time, someone who's now in that profession doing social engineering and deepfakes as a pen tester, well, look at what they can do. Like they can build stuff that I could only dream of. And they can build it super fast and they can deliver it super fast. They can do more than I could ever have done before. So again, it's like, are they getting replaced? No, they're just being augmented. So it's a long answer to a short question, but I can go back. I think I'd like to just build houses. I think it'd be kind of fun and kind of cool. But at the same time, like I don't actually figure that like our careers are all doomed and the planet's going to end.
Got you. I think you're right. I agree. I think if you're a pen tester, as you said, and you're not moving with the time, you're adapting to the times, then you probably are screwed. But you need to adapt, right?
And that's where the problems start. Like I controversy that pisses off a lot of CISOs, but like we're in a space where lots of people are talking about AI, they're not doing anything.
Yeah.
Like if you're not hands-on, if you're not playing with like brain tools like Notion or Claude Code or like building Zaps or like going to Lovable and Replit and vibe coding tools, even if it's completely meaningless shit, just like to prove that you can. Like if you're not doing that stuff now, you're going to get left behind. The reality is like, this isn't a technology where it's like SaaS. SaaS was going to happen. You have to understand somewhat. This is something which requires you to actually be invested. Like you have to be doing stuff and working out what can you do more because someone else will be doing it. I guarantee you there are other CISOs out there who are spending more time in Claude Code than me. So when it comes in like 6 or 9 months time, what they can do with the same amount of time as I can do might be entirely different. And maybe they're way better and more valuable than I am. So like your value right now is demonstrated by how much you can leverage technologies to improve what you can do by replacing some of the things which you don't need to be doing anymore. Focus on other things. Sweet. Same in recruitment. There's multiple things. You could deploy an agent to do all kinds of searching for you, to build like profiles for you, to identify people against those profiles, to identify people who you don't think are in the profiles, to profile companies and work out. I mean, I could build an agent. They could tell you who's going to hire before they're going to hire. So you can build the relationships first. There's a load of key indicators, which will be like, obvious metrics that show that process and that journey before someone says, I need to hire like 6 decks. Like,
Let's talk after this. Yeah.
look, yeah, but seriously, I look at it. You think about it, you're like, I need a company who is growing at this rate.
Yeah.
I need a company who's talking about having these kind of product features, who is showing to these kind of customers, who's in this kind of geographical territory, who's just raised this much money. And then before any of these things actually happen, well, I could tell you was going to like hire the next like 20 engineers or the next like CISO or the next go-to-market function. Like it's, these are the places where I think people are now going to start differentiating because they're going to start actually finding ways to automate and therefore act faster than other people in their field. I've promised my audience that like, I'm not creating any AI content because right now, all of the blogs, all of the videos, all of the posts, they're all created by AI and they're all terrible.
Yeah.
But because the reality is that AI, while it's great, is limited in almost like a copy and paste job. So anything you say is the same thing the next person says. That's how the brain actually works. So like, I think now human connection, authenticity. Like I spent a lot of time trying to talk about my thoughts, my family, my journey, my experience. I said, we talked before we got on it, I've come to where I was saying, you must be the 100th person to ask me how I am. And it's because I've literally lived my journey about not being very well last week in a public space, right? AI can't talk about my health. And I think that's the same when we podcast, when we meet in person, when we physically interact, those experiences now become way more valuable because they're way more real. Like they give us a chance to return to almost primal things where like we want to engage with people. We want to shake hands. We want to hug. We want to look in someone's eyes. Like we want to laugh. Like I'm not going to laugh with Claude, right? We want to have interactions that are meaningful to us.
Yeah.
So I think that if you look at now, whether you're a recruitment or you're a vendor or you are just trying to build your own brand and network, definitely driving more towards a physical space where people congregate together, exchange ideas and talk about, similarly, they might be talking about what they're using AI for, which is ironic because I'm saying go away from AI, but maybe they talk about and exchange ideas, right? About how I've done this or I built this or I use this. And we exchange that and that knowledge share is something which is really hard to get anywhere else. So I 100% think that the rise of particularly AI content creation is going to drive us more into physical human interactions.
Incredible. And last question, so I know you need to get out of it. Your platform, Anecdotes, relies a lot on the efficacy of it, relies a lot on sensitive data.
Yeah.
How are you governing AI agents to make sure they're not going to get breached?
It's a great question. So I think there are 3 steps to that, right? There is agents are created with skill sets, right? An agent, you don't just tell an agent don't do something it does something, right? You give it parameters, you give it knowledge, you give it a set of skills and core competencies. So the first one is understanding when you build agentic technologies that you have to know what to tell it to do, and more important, to tell it what it can't do. Right? So that's the core step. It's like, similar to you, if I give you a set of keys to every door, the chances are you'll open a door you weren't supposed to open. If I only give you keys to doors you're supposed to be in, the chance of you opening a door you're not meant to open, suddenly 0. Right? So it's the same concept, right? If I tell it it can access any data, it'll do whatever it can. If I tell it access all the data, but don't access this back-end part of like my Snowflake instance, it won't access it, right? That's the logic. I think the second one is how you authenticate and govern the access of those agents. Similar to a person, right? You need agents that therefore, when they go to give something, they've either been given access, credentials, authentication, or they haven't. If they haven't, you need to make sure it can't try and force its way in. It's the second one. The third is monitoring. Like if you're going to set up agentic work technologies, you have to understand what it's doing, but you have to see what it's done. So if I then look and say, well, here's its output, and I go, oh, hell, like it probably shouldn't know that. I have to work back through that to work out why it knows that. Because I thought that I didn't give it access. I thought I didn't authenticate it, and I thought I told it not to do that. So they need to go back in the iterative approach and learn. AI is like teaching a human, like mentoring someone, it's iterative. Then once you get to that point, you'll need to occasionally not just iterate, but validate that your assumptions and assertions are true. So I think that and again, the interesting fact here, when it gets kind of like a little bit more creepy, is the most effective way to do this to govern agents is to deploy agents to govern agents. And that's where you get to this point. You've got like an agent reviewing an agent, reviewing an agent. You create the code for an agent. I think that's where you can get into this weird kind of space that people get confused. But the reality again is that everywhere a human can make a mistake, an agent can make a mistake too. So when it comes to governance, I think that the true point is only ever expose data that you're comfortable with seeing. So control what it has access to. Control how it authenticates access to that thing. Make sure you iterate to test during the initial phase of deploying it. And then make sure you later verify and validate that what you think it's doing is actually what it's doing. If all those things are true, then theoretically it's anything to a person. The same way that when we first deployed like Cursor, people went and looked and went, actually, hang on a sec. I didn't really realize that everyone had access to like this sensitive financial data on payroll. We thought we built these mechanisms in place. It turned out they were all completely non-functional. It turned out that most of the way that we've architected data storage in the company didn't work. So the same way that like we're worried about the agent, like we historically should have been worried about the person. The person got access, we just didn't know they had access because we weren't being super sensitive in the same way we are being to edge technologies. So I think that that's just applied logic. It's not my common thought around AI is like, we're saying that agents can replace the capabilities of people, so treat them like people. And if you take those core principles and apply technologies to do that in a more smart and more functional or effective way, you'll be fine.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jake. Appreciate it.
I appreciate the time.
And that's it for this week's episode. Thanks so much for listening, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Anything we talked about will be linked in the show notes. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we'll catch you on the next one.